In medieval times, nobody handed you a house. You built it yourself or slept in the cold. No fancy tools, no hired help, just daily work and a bit of hope. It wasn't fast, easy, or pretty, but medieval peasants got it done. Here's what building from scratch really meant back then. Finding the perfect spot for your medieval dream home wasn't exactly like scrolling through Zillow. For starters, peasants rarely owned the land they lived on. About 95% of all land in medieval Europe belonged to either wealthy lords or the church, leaving peasants to build with permission or sometimes just hoping nobody important would notice. The lords weren't exactly dropping by with housewarming gifts, either more like dropping by for rent collection. Peasants had to be strategic when choosing their home sites. Forest edges offered building materials and firewood right next door, while spots near streams provided water for drinking, cooking, and that once-a-year bath everyone talked about. Some brave souls practiced asserting clearing patches of forest to create new farmland and building space. This was technically illegal in many places and could result in hefty fines if caught. But if the local lord saw you improving his land, he might just let you stay and pay taxes on it. Unlike today, there were no complicated zoning laws or building permits. The main concerns were much more practical. With the ground flood when it rained, could you find enough flat space? Were there too many bugs? One strange fact is that some medieval villages actually moved locations entirely over centuries, not because of planning, but because peasants gradually rebuilt their homes closer to better resources. The perfect medieval building site needed 3 key things: access to water, nearby timber, and ground that wouldn't turn into a swamp at the first sign of rain. If you found all 3, you'd call it home faster than you could save feudal obligations. Of course, picking your spot was just the beginning. You couldn't exactly order pre-cut lumber from the local hardware store. The medieval version of free shipping was literally you shipping your own backass. You hauled logs home. Most peasant homes were small, usually just one room about 15 by 20 feet. But that didn't make gathering materials any easier. With your spots selected and marked out with stakes, the real work was about to begin. A good location might save your life in winter, but it wouldn't keep the rain off your head or the wolves from your door. For that, you needed something more substantial than just a promising patch of dirt. Medieval forests served as the hardware stores of their time. But getting timber wasn't as simple as grabbing a shopping cart. Wood was the most essential building material for peasant homes, yet its collection came with challenges that would make modern DIY enthusiasts quit on day one. Access to forests was strictly controlled, while peasants could usually gather dead wood. For fires, cutting live trees often required permission from the local lord. Many medieval forests had specific rules called forest laws that determined who could take what. Breaking these rules could result in fines or worse. Records from 13th century England show some unfortunate souls lost hands for timber theft. The tools for wood collection were painfully basic. Most peasants owned an axe-prized possession passed through generations. For splitting logs, they used iron or wooden wedges hammered with mallets. No power tools, here just power struggles with stubborn tree trunks. Timing mattered tremendously. Greenwood, freshly cut, bent easier for curved pieces, but would shrink and crack as it dried. Dry wood was more stable, but harder to work with. The smartest builders cut wood in winter when sap was low, then let it season for months before building. Different parts of the house required different types of wood. Oak was preferred for main support posts due to its strength. Some medieval oak frames still stand today, over 500 years later. For the bendy parts needed for walls, peasants sought hazel, willow, or young ash saplings that could be woven between posts. Transportation presented another headache. Logs were heavy, and medieval roads were basically mud tracks that turned into soup during rain. Getting wood home was the original drag-and-drop interface, literally, dragging logs through mud until you dropped from exhaustion. Most building sites were limited to using trees within a mile or two. The forest was also home to wolves, bears, and bandits, making lumber collection the original extreme sport. Many went in groups, turning timber harvesting into social events, where strength in numbers provided both safety and extra hands for the heavy lifting. After weeks of gathering, splitting, and dragging, a pile of timber would finally appear at the building site. With materials collected and the seasons carefully considered, it was time to put all that hard-earned wood to good use. The community would soon gather for the next crucial step in bringing shelter to life. When it came time to raise the timber frame, medieval peasants turned house building into the original community event. Medieval home construction was always a group effort. The timber frame formed the skeleton of the house and had to be assembled first. Getting started meant digging holes, deep ones. Main support posts needed to be sunk at least 2 feet into the ground for stability. These holes were dug using simple wooden shovels or iron spades for the lucky few who owned metal tools. Many medieval house posts were set on large stones at the bottom of these holes, creating natural drainage and preventing rot. Once holes were ready, the raising began. 4 to 6 strong adults would lift each major post while someone else guided it into position. This was not the time to show off your independence. Try raising a 20-foot oak beam alone, and you'd quickly become the village pancake joints, were the true marvel of medieval engineering. Without metal fasteners, builders relied on woodworking techniques like mortise and tenon joints, wooden puzzle pieces that fit together perfectly, a rectangular hole cut into one beam and a matching tongue carved into another. When assembled correctly, these joints could hold firm for centuries without nails. Wooden pegs driven through overlapping beams secured everything together. These pegs were called tree nails and were typically made from dried hardwood like oak or maple. They swelled when wet, creating an even tighter fit during rainy weather. The main event was raising the roof beams. This required careful coordination, as heavy timbers were lifted into position by as many as 10 people using ropes and poles. Records from medieval building projects suggest that accidents were common. One account mentions 3 men injured when a roof beam slipped. Teamwork was an option, it was survival. Village communities developed unwritten rules about helping with house raising. If you refuse to help your neighbor build their home, don't expect anyone to show up when yours needed repair. With the frame standing tall and secured, the structure finally began to take shape. But a house of only beams wouldn't keep anyone dry for long. Now came the task of filling those empty spaces between the timbers with something that could turn a skeleton into a home. With the timber frame standing strong, medieval builders faced their next challenge, filling in the walls. Enter wattle and daub, the medieval world's answer to drywall, except much messier and surprisingly effective. This building technique was so common that over 90% of medieval peasant homes used it. The process began with wattling, weaving flexible sticks between the upright timber posts. Workers used thin branches from hazel, willow, or other bendable woods, creating a lattice. pattern that resembled a giant basket. This woven framework provided the structure for the daub. What exactly was daub? A sticky mixture that combined clay soil, sand, and straw plus one special ingredient, animal manure. It was the secret adhesive that held medieval homes together. The science behind this unusual mixture was surprisingly sound. Clay provided the body, sand prevented cracking, straw added strength, and dung contained natural binding agents. Medieval builders might not have understood chemistry, but they definitely knew their crap. Making daub was a hands-on family affair. Everyone participated in mixing the ingredients in a pit by stomping it with bare feet until it reached the right consistency. Children often joined this mud-stomping party, turning messy work into play. Application required skill developed through generations. Workers slapped handfuls of daub onto both sides of the wattle framework, simultaneously pressing it through the gaps until the two sides joined in the middle. They smoothed the surface using wooden floats or simply their hands. Drying took patience. A newly daubed wall needed weeks to harden properly, and weather could complicate the process. Once dry, the walls received a protective coating of lime, whitewash if the family could afford it. This bright white finish sealed the daub, deterred insects, and reflected precious light into the dim interior. The completed wattle and daub walls provided decent insulation and were surprisingly durable. Archaeological evidence shows some medieval sections lasted hundreds of years, not bad for walls, made partially from dirt and dung, with walls now enclosing the space. Protection from wind and rain was nearly complete. But what about keeping the family dry from above? Look up at most medieval peasant houses, and you'd see thatch nature's roofing solution that combined readily available materials with surprising effectiveness. Thatch roofs were the standard covering for peasant homes across medieval Europe. The creation of a thatch roof required significant skill. Professional thatchers were highly respected, craftsmen in medieval communities. The process began with gathering massive amounts of dried plant material. Wheat straw was most common in farming areas, while water reeds provided superior durability. Near marshlands, the thatching technique involved layering bundles of material from the bottom edge of the roof upward, each bundle secured using split hazel branches called sways. The thatcher worked upward, overlapping each new layer to shed water efficiently. When finished properly, these roofs were remarkably waterproof and insulating. The steep pitch, usually around 45 to 60 degrees, allowed rainwater to run off quickly. Thatched roofs typically reached 12 to 15 inches in thickness, keeping homes warmer in winter and cooler in summer. But thatch had serious drawbacks. Fire risk topped the list. A single spark from the central hearth could ignite the dried material. Many medieval towns eventually banned thatch after devastating fires. The roof also served as luxury housing for uninvited guests, mice, birds, insects, even snakes. Most thatch roofs needed replacement every 15 to 25 years. Though well-maintained water, reed thatch could last 50 to 60 years. The old thatch was recycled as garden mulch or animal bedding. With walls and a roof, the house was now enclosed. But what about life inside? Fire sat at the heart of every medieval home, quite literally. It was the only heat source, the cooking stove, the light fixture, and the bug repellent. But in early medieval houses, there was a catch: no chimney. Smoke from the central hearth simply rose and filled the room, eventually escaping through small gaps in the thatch or a hole in the roof. It wasn't cozy, it was smoky. Some homes developed a smoke shelf, a wooden platform near the roof where smoke collected before exiting. Others had a simple louver or flap that could be opened to let it out. The hearth was usually just a circle of stones on the packed earth floor, but it was everything. Over this fire, meals were boiled in iron pots or roasted on spits. Bread was baked in clay-domed ovens, sometimes shared communally. A suspended iron hook or chain hung over the fire to hold pots adjustable in height to control temperature. A clever bit of medieval engineering, lighting, came from the fire and rushlights thin. Strips of dried rush plants soaked in animal fat, burned slowly in iron holders. Candles were expensive and rarely used by peasants. The fire's heat dried clothes and warmed bodies, but smoke blackened the walls and ceilings. Some families built raised sleeping platforms to stay above the worst of the smoke. Over time, as chimneys were introduced in wealthier homes, smoke management improved, but for most peasants, their homes remained ashy dens. The fire also attracted pests. Flies buzzed around drying meats, and rats enjoyed dropped crumbs. But it was also protection. Wolves, known to wander near villages, avoided firelight. With fire crackling, the house was finally alive, warm, glowing, and filled with the scent of wood smoke and stew. But a home wasn't just for walls and a fire. The real life of the house came from how it was furnished and who slept under its roof. Inside a medieval peasant home, things were simple, sometimes shockingly so. The average house had only 1 or 2 rooms. The main room served every purpose: cooking, eating, working, sleeping, even birthing. Furniture was sparse and often handmade. A table, some benches, maybe a chest if you were lucky. Beds, if they existed, were wooden frames stuffed with straw or dried leaves. Most people slept directly on the floor or on straw mats shared between family members. Children often curled up with parents or siblings in the same heap of bedding, using cloaks or old sacks as blankets. Clothing hung from pegs on the walls. Utensils and tools were stored in baskets or hung from rafters. Walls were often decorated with herbs, dried fish, or household charms to ward off evil spirits and illness. Floors were packed dirt or sometimes covered with rushes reeds scattered, with herbs like lavender or mint to mask smells and soak up spills. These rushes were changed infrequently, creating layers of debris that animals like fleas loved to hide in. The home was also a workspace. Spinning wheels, looms, and tools crowded the space. Women spun wool and flax into thread, while children helped card fibers or sort vegetables. Men sharpened tools by the firelight or made repairs to harnesses and carts. One often forgotten feature was the presence of animals inside the home. In cold months, chickens, goats, even pigs were brought inside for warmth and protection. A corner of the room might be fenced off for a small pen. The result? A pungent, noisy, chaotic environment, but it meant survival. The medieval peasant house wasn't clean or quiet, but it was home a refuge against cold nights, marauders, and hunger. But even this simple space wasn't truly complete without its final element: the people around you. You didn't build a medieval house alone, not really. Even if you chopped every log and shaped every beam yourself, the final creation always reflected your relationships. The peasant home was often shared by extended family, grandparents, cousins, and sometimes even neighbors would share the same roof. Privacy wasn't a concept. People changed clothes, argued, gave birth, and died, all within feet of one another. Your family was your world. Building a home meant leaning on that world. When a new house was raised, the entire village might help. Friends brought tools. Neighbors offered food. Children helped shape daub or fetch water. The act of building created bonds. Failing to help could mark you as selfish, a dangerous label. In communities that depended on mutual aid for survival, once finished, the house stood as a symbol of more than just shelter. It marked your place in the world. You were no longer a wanderer or a tenant farmer without roots. You had walls, a roof, and a hearth. Even if you owed rent to a lord or tithed to the church, the house was yours in a deeper sense. You had built it. It contained your sweat, your hopes, your future. Over time, homes were modified, repaired, rebuilt. Children born in the house might someday inherit it. Sometimes entire villages slowly shifted as old houses crumbled and new ones rose nearby. The memory of the people who built them lived on in the shape of the roof, the lean of the walls, the curve of the path to the door. A medieval house was never just a structure, it was a life. Woven into its walls were stories of hardship, resilience, and community. And when it eventually fell to ruin, the earth reclaimed it quietly. But its memory remained in the minds of those who had lived within, warmed by its fire and sheltered by its beams. Even now, centuries later, we can trace those footprints in the fields. We find remnants of foundations, shards of pottery, a scorched hearthstone, proof that someone once said, "This is where I will live." And then they built. There is a moment, just after dusk, when the last light fades through the cracks in the timber walls, and the fire begins to speak. In a medieval home, the fire wasn't just a source of warmth. It was a presence, a comfort, a quiet guardian. In a world of cold, wind, and dark, it cracked softly in the hearth, sending shadows dancing across the low beams and earthen floor. It sizzled as it met the fat from a simmering stew. It glowed with orange light, chasing away the long hours of winter. At the center of almost every medieval house was the open hearth. No chimney, just smoke, rising up and lingering near the roof beams before slipping through a hole or finding its way out through the thatch. The smoke stung your eyes. It hung thick in the air. It turned walls black and settled in your lungs. But without it, there was no warmth. Without it, there was no cooked food, no boiled water, no softened linen, no life. Families arranged their days around it. Morning porridge, midday broth, evening bread baked on hot stones. Meals were simple, but the fire gave them meaning. A hanging pot swayed gently on a chain. A bit of dried meat crisped on a spit. Children pressed close to warm their hands. Above the fire, tools and herbs dangled from rafters. Iron hooks, wooden ladles, drying thyme and garlic. The scents mingled: smoke, stew, sweat, and straw. It was pungent, but to a medieval nose, it was the smell of home. When the wind howled and wolves cried out in the night, the fire was still there, flickering, humming, holding the darkness back. Mothers whispered lullabies beside it. Fathers mended tools in its glow. Stories were told, passed down like warm blankets to the next generation. The fire was never just fire. It was memory. It was safety. It was the heart of the home. Step quietly. Now the fire is low. The rushlights flicker, and inside the house everyone is asleep. The floor is earthen, cold and packed. The walls are timber and wattle, lined with straw and daub. There is no wallpaper, no insulation, but there are signs of life everywhere. Near the door stands a wooden chest. Its hinges creak when opened, revealing spare tunics, a belt, and perhaps a pouch of dried herbs. Beside it, a stool hand-carved, uneven. On the wall hangs a single iron pot, blackened from years of cooking. A wooden spoon rests nearby. The bed, if there is one, is a low platform of boards and straw, covered with old cloth and maybe a sheepskin. Most families don't sleep in beds. They curl together on mats by the fire, parents, children, and sometimes even animals. The warmth of each other is all they have. Look up, and you might see dried fish hanging from a beam, or bundles of garlic and sage, a charm made of twigs meant to ward off spirit swings gently in the draught. The room is small, perhaps 12 feet across, but in this space lives Unfold. A woman spins wool by firelight, her foot slowly pressing the treadle. A child grinds grain between 2 stones. A man repairs a broken boot, the leather stiff from days of wear. In the corner, a dog sleeps, tail curled tight, and under the bench 2 chickens quietly roosting. The air is thick with the scent of smoke, wool, and old wood. But it's familiar, it's safe. Everything has a place, even if that place is a corner of the floor or a hook on the wall. This isn't clutter, it's survival. In winter months, the line between home and barn disappears. Pig snuffles in its pen in the far corner of the house. A goat lies curled beside the wall. Chickens peck quietly near the door, feathers fluffed against the cold. Animals are not guests, they are part of the family. Their warmth helps heat the house, their safety ensured by sharing walls. The pig provides meat for spring, the goat, milk, the chickens, eggs. At night, the sounds are soft, the occasional grunt, a flap of wings, the shifting of hooves on straw. To outsiders, it might seem chaotic, but to those who live here, it's rhythm, it's life. The beasts are fed from the same hands that knead bread and cradle infants. They are noisy, yes, and they smell, but they are precious. Their presence means the difference between hunger and plenty, between bare walls and full bellies. And so, in the quiet of the medieval night, man and animal sleep beneath the same roof, dreaming, breathing, surviving together. A medieval house was not built alone. Yes, you might fell the timber yourself. You might daub the walls and raise the roof. But from the first post to the last nail, your neighbors were there. When a new home was begun, the village stirred. Men came with tools. Women brought food. Children fetched water and laughed in the dust. A house raising was a ritual, a celebration. The start of a new life, a new chapter, and once built, the house bore there marks: a beam hewn by your uncle, a thatched panel sewn by a friend, a hearthstone laid by your father's hand. In every creak of wood and rustle of straw, their labor whispered, and in times of need, fire, storm, sickness, same hands would return to repair, to rebuild, to remember. Chapter 14. The house as a legacy is passed. Seasons change. Children grow. The house stands, its beams darken with age. The straw in the roof is patched, then patched again. The floor hardens. The door sags, but it endures. New generations sleep beneath its eaves. Laughter echoes in the same corners. Bread bakes over the same hearth. And when, one day, the house is no longer enough, when it leans too far or rots too deep, is taken down, but not erased. A new house rises nearby, stronger, warmer, built with the same tools, the same hands, the same hope. And still, if you walk the field where the old house stood, you may find a stone, a bit of pottery, a blackened shard from the hearth top, proof that someone lived here, that someone built, that someone loved. And when the wind sighs through the grass, it carries the soft echo of firelight, of footsteps on packed earth, a quiet voice, long ago, saying, "This is where I will live."